A 4-year-old girl disappears from her bed in the early morning hours of September 25, 2006. Valentina Mendoza, with her perfect pigtails and pink dress, vanishes without a trace from her family's home in Mexico City. For 72 agonizing hours, an entire city desperately searches for the little girl. Police, neighbors, relatives, no one can explain how a child simply disappeared into thin air. But when her mother checks the security cameras 3 days later, she discovers a truth that shatters her completely. What happened that night had been hidden in the most unexpected place, and the culprit was closer than she ever imagined. 18 years later, this story would reach its most surprising and inexplicable conclusion. A case that defies all logic and forever changes your perception of maternal love. Who was really responsible for the tragedy? And why, after nearly 2 decades, would this story have the most extraordinary ending ever documented? This is the full investigation of the Valentina Mendoza case, a mystery that was only solved when the impossible became reality. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more cases like this, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It was September 25, 2006, at 4:16 a.m. in the quiet neighborhood of Jardines del Pedregal, Mexico City. Little Valentina Mendoza was peacefully sleeping in her bed. At just 4 years old, she was full of life, with chestnut hair tied into 2 perfect pigtails her mother, Carmen Mendoza, styled every night. That morning, she wore her favorite pink dress, the one she had chosen herself before bed, insisting she didn't want to change into pajamas. The Mendoza home was a middle-upper-class residence with a large garden and a swimming pool, which had been Roberto Mendoza's pride, the father of Valentina. Carmen had woken up abruptly from a strange dream, one of those maternal instincts that can't be explained. At 4:30 a.m., she went to check on her daughter to make sure everything was okay. The bed was empty. The rumpled sheets showed signs. The girl had been there, but Valentina was gone. Carmen began searching the entire house, her heart pounding harder with every step. She checked every room, every closet, every corner where a 4-year-old could be hiding, but Valentina was nowhere to be found. Roberto had gone out the night before with colleagues. Carmen vividly remembered the argument they had before he left. Lately, Roberto had developed the habit of drinking too much and coming home in the early morning hours. That night was no different, and Carmen was once again left alone to care for Valentina. Max, the family's golden retriever, had been Valentina's inseparable companion since she was 2 years old. That morning, Max was running frantically through the house, barking desperately, as if trying to alert someone to something urgent. His barking had started around 4:20 a.m., but Carmen, in a state of shock from her daughter's disappearance, couldn't interpret the signals the dog was trying to send. As the hours passed, the search intensified. Carmen called the police, and soon the house filled with officers, neighbors, and relatives, all joining the search. Everyone was looking for a 4-year-old girl with chestnut pigtails and a pink dress, who had mysteriously vanished from her bed in the middle of the night. No one thought to check the pool during those first few hours. It was unthinkable that such a young child could have gotten there on her own, especially since the door to the pool area was typically kept locked for safety. However, in the chaos and desperation, that crucial detail went unnoticed. Hours passed with no news of Valentina Mendoza. Carmen hadn't slept in 72 hours. Her red eyes and drawn face showed the agony of a mother who had lost her child with no explanation. Police had questioned neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances, but no clue brought them closer to finding little Valentina. Roberto had returned home drunk in the early hours of September 25th and could not clearly remember what had happened that night. When Carmen told him about their daughter's disappearance, guilt and panic took hold of him. Investigators immediately noticed his unstable state and evasive behavior during questioning. Over those 3 days, the Jardins del Pedregal community came together like never before. Search teams combed through parks, empty lots, abandoned homes, anywhere a child could have wandered or been taken. Local media covered the case extensively, broadcasting Valentina's photo in her pink dress and pigtails, begging citizens to report any information. Max the Golden Retriever continued his strange behavior during those 3 days. He refused to eat, constantly ran to the backyard, and barked toward the pool area. Carmen, drowning in sorrow and desperation, interpreted the dog's behavior as stress from the situation. Neighbors noted that Max hadn't stopped barking since the early morning of September 25. The police investigation focused on the possibility of a kidnapping. Authorities suspected someone close to the family might be involved, especially since there were no signs of forced entry. Roberto became the main suspect, particularly after investigators uncovered inconsistencies in his account of the night's events. On September 28th, after 3 fruitless days of searching, Carmen made a decision that would change her life forever. She remembered the house had a security camera system that Roberto had installed months earlier. In her desperation, she had completely forgotten about it. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, Carmen went to the monitoring room to check the footage from the early hours of September 25. What she saw devastated her completely. At 4:16 a.m., the camera had recorded little Valentina leaving the house and heading toward the backyard, where Max was waiting, wagging his tail. The girl ran joyfully to her canine companion, unaware that these were her final moments alive. Carmen clung to the monitor in despair as the images played. The cameras had captured every moment of the tragedy that unfolded in their home that night. Valentina was seen running barefoot through the yard, her pink dress fluttering in the night wind. The footage showed Max had gone outside, likely to relieve himself, and Valentina, hearing him, decided to follow him to play. The door to the pool area was wide open, something that immediately caught Carmen's attention. That door was always kept shut. It was a strict household rule due to the danger it posed to a young child. In the footage, Valentina was seen running toward Max, who was near the pool's edge. The girl tried to reach her dog, and in a moment that seemed to happen in slow motion, she lost her balance and fell into the water. The splash was caught on audio by the cameras, and that sound coincided exactly with the moment Max had started barking frantically. Carmen watched in horror as Max ran around the pool, barking and trying to alert someone to what had happened. The dog even tried to help Valentina by partially jumping into the water, but his size and the pool's depth made a rescue impossible. For nearly 2 hours, Max continued barking, running from the pool to the house, desperately trying to communicate the emergency. The cameras had recorded everything: Max's failed attempts to save Valentina, his relentless barking that no one had understood, and the exact moment when the movement in the water stopped completely. Carmen realized that during those 72 hours of desperate searching, her daughter had been at the bottom of her own pool. With shaking legs and a shattered heart, Carmen ran to the backyard. Max followed, barking again, as if someone had finally understood his plea. When she reached the pool's edge, Carmen could see a small figure at the bottom. It was Valentina, still wearing her pink dress, her pigtails floating gently in the water. Carmen's scream woke the entire neighborhood. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Little Valentina Mendoza had died from drowning in the early morning of September 25, 2006, at 4:18 a.m., just 2 minutes after falling into the water. Her body had remained at the bottom of the pool for 72 hours. While the entire city searched for her, the police investigation immediately focused on determining how the door to the pool area had been left open, a door that was supposed to remain locked for safety reasons. The investigation into Valentina Mendoza's death took an unexpected turn when Authorities began reconstructing the events of the night of September 24th, 2006. Roberto Mendoza, who had been avoiding specific questions about that night, was finally confronted with evidence he could no longer deny. The security cameras had captured the exact moment Roberto arrived home that night. It was 3:45 a.m. when his car pulled into the garage, clearly showing his intoxicated state by the erratic way he drove. The footage showed him staggering as he walked toward the house, tripping over garden objects and visibly disoriented. During police questioning, Roberto initially denied having been near the pool area that night. However, the security cameras told a different story. At 3:52 a.m., just 7 minutes after arriving home, Roberto appeared in the footage walking toward the backyard. His behavior suggested he needed to vomit due to the amount of alcohol he had consumed. The recordings showed that Roberto, in his drunken state, opened the door leading to the pool area to head toward the bush at the back of the garden. After several minutes, the cameras captured him returning to the house, but in his altered state, he had completely forgotten to close the safety door that secured the pool area. Carmen learned this information 5 months after Valentina's funeral. Investigators showed her the full recordings, including the footage of Roberto from that night. The emotional impact was devastating for Carmen, who realized that her daughter's death had been caused by her own husband's negligence. The confrontation between Carmen and Roberto was inevitable. When she showed him the evidence, Roberto broke down completely. Through tears, he confessed that he vaguely remembered vomiting in the garden that night, but due to his level of intoxication, he didn't remember leaving the pool door open. The guilt had been eating away at him for 5 months, but he hadn't had the courage to admit it. Roberto explained that his alcoholism had worsened in the months leading up to the accident due to work problems and financial stress. He had been drinking regularly and coming home in the early morning hours, but he never imagined his behavior could endanger his daughter. The night of September 24th had been particularly intense. He had been drinking from 6 p.m. until 3 a.m. Carmen understood that Roberto hadn't intentionally caused Valentina's death, but his negligence and alcoholism had created the perfect conditions for the tragedy. The open door had been the invitation Valentina needed to follow Max into the pool area with fatal consequences. The revelation completely destroyed Carmen and Roberto's marriage. The months that followed were the darkest of Carmen Mendoza's life. Knowing that Roberto's negligence had caused Valentina's death created a wound that seemed impossible to heal. The house in Jardins del Pedregal, which had once been filled with laughter and joy, became a mausoleum of painful memories. Carmen decided to separate from Roberto immediately after learning the truth. She couldn't continue living with the man whose alcoholism had cost their daughter's life. Roberto, consumed by guilt and self-pity, did not resist the divorce. He knew he had lost not only his daughter, but also his wife, and that he was entirely responsible for both losses. Divorce process was relatively quick, but extremely painful. Carmen wasn't looking for financial revenge. She just wanted to distance herself from everything that reminded her of that fateful night. Roberto agreed to give her full custody of Max, the golden retriever who had been a silent witness to the tragedy. Carmen knew that Max had done everything he could to save Valentina, and she felt that the dog was the only thing she had left of her daughter Dot in the first years after the separation. Carmen lived in a deep state of depression. She had quit her job as a primary school teacher because she couldn't bear to be surrounded by children the same age Valentina would have been. She moved to a small apartment in another part of the city, taking only the essentials and of course, Max had also changed after the tragedy. The playful and energetic dog had become quieter and more attached to Carmen. It was as if they both shared a silent grief that only they could understand. Max became Carmen's constant companion, the only living being who truly understood what they had lost that September morning. As for Roberto, he hit rock bottom after the divorce. His alcoholism worsened even further. He lost his job and had several run-ins with the law for driving under the influence. He tried to contact Carmen multiple times, seeking forgiveness and reconciliation, but she had made it clear she never wanted to hear from him again. Carmen's friends and family tried to help her overcome her grief, but she had shut herself off from the world. She attended therapy regularly, but progress was slow and painful. Her therapist explained that she was experiencing complicated grief, made worse by the fact that her daughter's death had been caused by someone so close to her. During those difficult years, Carmen found comfort in small rituals that kept Valentina's memory alive. She visited her grave every week, kept her photograph in the living room, and preserved some of her favorite toys. Max seemed to understand these rituals and always accompanied her, as if he too needed to honor the memory of his little playmate. Time passed slowly, but gradually Carmen began to rebuild her life, though she would never be the same person she had been before losing Valentina. Time had moved slowly for Carmen Mendoza. 18 years after the tragedy that changed her life forever, she was in a very different place, both physically and emotionally. At 48 years old, she had managed to rebuild her life step by step, though the pain of losing Valentina never fully disappeared. Max, her faithful companion, had passed away from old age 6 years earlier. At 15, his death was another devastating loss for Carmen, as Max had been her last direct link to Valentina. And that terrible night. However, by that time, Carmen had developed enough emotional tools to process the pain in a healthier way. Over the years, Carmen had gradually returned to teaching, though now she worked with high school students instead of younger children. She found purpose in helping teenagers going through difficult times, using her own experience of loss and recovery to guide them. Her colleagues described her as an exceptionally empathetic and understanding teacher. In 2020, Carmen met Miguel Hernandez in a support group for people who had lost loved ones. Miguel was a widower. He had lost his first wife in a car accident 10 years earlier. Both had joined the group seeking tools to manage their grief and gradually developed a friendship based on a mutual understanding of what it meant to lose someone dearly loved. Carmen and Miguel's relationship developed slowly. Both had learned that love after profound loss had different qualities. It was more mature, more aware of life's fragility, and more grateful for each shared moment. Miguel fully respected Valentina's memory and never tried to replace the place the girl held in Carmen's heart. They were married in a small, intimate ceremony in 2022, 16 years after Valentina's death. Carmen had hesitated for a long time before taking this step, consulting her therapist for months about whether she was emotionally ready to open her heart again. The ceremony was emotional but serene, with one empty chair adorned with pink flowers in honor of Valentina. Miguel. He worked as a civil engineer and had previously been married for 12 years before becoming a widower. He had not had children with his first wife due to fertility issues, but had always wanted to be a father. When he and Carmen began considering the possibility of having a child together, they both knew it would be a decision filled with complex emotions. After many deep conversations and couples therapy sessions, Carmen and Miguel decided to try to conceive a child. Carmen was 49 years old when she became pregnant, a pregnancy considered high risk due to her age. However, they both felt that this new life was a blessing and an opportunity to create something beautiful after so much pain. During the pregnancy, Carmen experienced a mixture of emotions: joy, fear, guilt, and hope, constantly alternated. She wondered whether bringing another daughter into the world was a betrayal of Valentina's memory, but her therapist helped her understand that loving another child didn't diminish the love she felt for Valentina. March 15, 2024. Carmen and Miguel welcomed their daughter Isabella Hernandez Mendoza. The birth was complicated due to Carmen's age, but after 12 hours of labor, the little girl arrived healthy and beautiful. When Carmen held Isabella for the first time, she felt such an intense wave of emotions that it took her breath away. Isabella was born weighing 3.2 kilograms and measuring 50 centimeters. Her first cries filled the hospital room, and Carmen couldn't help but recall the first cry of Valentina 18 years earlier. Miguel, who had been nervous throughout the pregnancy, immediately calmed upon seeing his healthy daughter and hearing her. Strong lungs. The first months with Isabella were a revelation for Carmen. She had forgotten the intensity of maternal love, the way every sound, every movement, every expression of a baby could completely fill a mother's heart. Isabella was a calm baby during the day, but very active at night, keeping her parents awake yet happy. Miguel proved to be an exceptional father, dedicated and patient. He had read every parenting book he could find and had meticulously prepared for Isabella's arrival. His dedication allowed Carmen to enjoy motherhood without the pressure of having to do everything alone, as she had largely done while raising Valentina. When Isabella turned 6 months old, Carmen began noticing striking physical similarities between her and Valentina. Both girls had the same large, expressive eyes, the same way of smiling, and especially the same way of moving their hands when they were happy. Carmen had saved many baby photos of Valentina, and the similarities were undeniable. The resemblances became even more evident when Isabella began walking at around 10 months. Her way of running with her arms outstretched to maintain balance was identical to how Valentina had run at the same age. Miguel also noticed these similarities, but they both agreed not to comment on them so as not to create a strange atmosphere around Isabella. When Isabella turned 1, Carmen decided to show her photographs of Valentina. She wanted her new daughter to know about her older sister in a way appropriate for her age. Miguel fully supported this decision, understanding that Valentina would always be part of the family. Isabella seemed fascinated by the pictures of Valentina. She pointed at them and babbled enthusiastically, as if recognizing something familiar. Carmen interpreted these reactions as natural curiosity, but in her heart, she felt there was something deeper in the connection Isabella seemed to have with the images of her sister. Isabella's early years unfolded in an atmosphere of love and stability. Carmen had learned from her previous experience and made sure to establish strict safety routines in their new home. There was no pool, all doors had safety locks, and both Carmen and Miguel remained constantly attentive to their daughter's movements. Miguel turned out to be not only a supportive husband, but also an exemplary father who deeply respected Valentina's memory while creating new family memories with Isabella. When Isabella turned 3, something extraordinary began to happen. The similarities between her and Valentina, which had until then been mostly physical, began to manifest in behaviors and expressions that left Carmen completely astonished. Isabella had already developed the same preference for pink dresses that Valentina once had, without anyone ever suggesting it. She consistently rejected other clothing colors, insisting specifically on pink dresses. When Carmen asked her why she preferred that color, Isabella simply responded that it was her favorite, without being able to explain why. But the most surprising similarities began to appear in her speech. Isabella had started using specific expressions that had been unique to Valentina. When she wanted to play, she would say exactly what Valentina had once said, "Mommy, let's go make mischief." It was such a specific and uncommon phrase that Carmen froze the first time she heard it from Isabella's lips. Miguel, who of course had never known Valentina, didn't understand why Carmen became so emotional when Isabella said certain phrases. Carmen explained that they were identical expressions Valentina had used. But Miguel thought it might be a coincidence, or that Carmen might unconsciously be teaching those phrases to Isabella. When Isabella was 3.5 years old, something happened that convinced Carmen she was experiencing something beyond normal coincidences. One day, while playing in the garden of their new house, Isabella approached Carmen and said, "Mommy, do you remember when I was your other little girl and had a golden dog that took care of me a lot?" Carmen was left breathless. Isabella knew nothing about Max, the golden retriever who had been Valentina's companion. Carmen had never spoken specifically about Max, as she considered those details too painful and complicated for a young child. Yet Isabella had described Max and his relationship with Valentina perfectly. Miguel initially tried to rationalize these events, suggesting that Isabella might have seen photos of Max or overheard conversations without them noticing. However, Carmen was certain they had been extremely careful not to expose Isabella to specific details about Valentina's life. The phrases Isabella used were remarkably mature for her age. When she got hurt playing, instead of crying like most kids, her age, she would say, "It's okay, I'm really strong." This had been Valentina's exact response when she got minor injuries while playing. Isabella also showed a particular fascination with water, but in a way very different from how other children interact with it. Instead of the typical joy children display when playing in water, Isabella seemed to have a more contemplative, almost reverent relationship with it. During bath time, she would often sit very still, staring at the water with a thoughtful expression that was too deep for a child. Her age. Carmen began documenting all these coincidences in a private journal. She wanted to maintain an objective record of the events to better process them, and because part of her feared that she might be imagining connections that didn't exist, driven by her longing to keep Valentina's memory alive. The evidence, however, continued to accumulate in ways that defied simple rational explanations. When Isabella turned 4, the same age Valentina had been when she died, the similarities became even more pronounced and specific. Carmen had been observing her daughter closely, documenting every coincidence, every familiar phrase, every gesture that reminded her of Valentina. On Isabella's 4th birthday, Carmen decided to show her more photographs of Valentina, including some she had kept hidden away. She wanted to see how Isabella would react to more specific images of her older sister. Isabella's reaction was extraordinary. She pointed to a photograph of Valentina wearing a pink dress with embroidered flowers, and said, "That was my favorite dress, but it got wet and I couldn't wear it anymore." Carmen felt dizzy. That specific photo had been taken 2 days before the accident, and indeed, Valentina had been wearing that pink dress with embroidered flowers. It was impossible for Isabella to know that the dress had gotten wet and that Valentina had not been able to wear it again, unless... Carmen didn't dare complete that thought. Miguel, who had been skeptical for months, began to question his own rational explanations when he directly witnessed some of Isabella's statements. One morning at breakfast, Isabella looked out the window and said with nostalgia, "I miss my golden dog. He tried to take care of me, but I didn't understand what he was saying." That statement was particularly impactful because it perfectly described the relationship between Valentina and Max, and specifically referenced those final moments when Max had desperately tried to alert others to the danger. Carmen had never shared those painful details with Isabella. Isabella had also developed certain fears that had no explanation based on her current life experiences. She had a deep fear of swimming pools and any large body of water. When the family visited places with pools, Isabella would keep a considerable distance and often asked repeatedly if the doors were securely locked. These reactions were especially surprising because Isabella had never experienced any trauma related to water. Carmen and Miguel had been extremely careful not to project their own anxieties onto her. Yet Isabella seemed to have an intuitive, understanding of the specific dangers pools could pose. Then, one day, when Isabella was 4.5 years old, the most extraordinary event of all occurred. Carmen was sorting through an old box of Valentina's belongings when Isabella walked over and pulled out a small toy that had been Valentina's favorite, a little pink stuffed bunny named Bunny. Isabella hugged the toy to her chest and said, "My bunny, I had lost him." Carmen had never mentioned that specific toy to Isabella. Isabella then began to play with Bunny in exactly the same way Valentina had years before, making him fly through the air, whispering secrets in his ear, and insisting he sleep with her. Every night, Carmen observed these behaviors with a mixture of awe and unease. Miguel had begun researching reincarnation and past life experiences in young children. Although he was naturally skeptical, the events he was witnessing daily challenged his rational beliefs. He came across documented cases of children who remembered previous lives with astonishingly specific details they could not have possibly known otherwise. Carmen decided to consult her therapist about these extraordinary events, Dr. Patricia. Morales, who had been working with Carmen for years, listened carefully to the stories about Isabella. Her professional opinion was cautious but open. Though she couldn't scientifically explain what was happening, she acknowledged that Carmen was a stable and trustworthy person, and the events she described were too specific to be mere coincidence. Doctor Morales suggested that regardless of the explanation behind these phenomena, Carmen should focus on the fact that Isabella was a healthy and happy child who deserved to grow up free of expectations tied to Valentina. She also recommended that Carmen consider these events as a form of healing, a way to find peace with the loss of her first daughter. In every other way, Isabella continued to grow like any other normal child. She was intelligent, curious, social, with other children, and had a loving, healthy relationship with both Carmen and Miguel. The similarities to Valentina were just one facet of her personality. They did not define who Isabella was as an individual, and yet Carmen could not deny that these events had brought her a peace she hadn't felt in 18 years. It was as though Valentina had returned to her in some way, not to erase the pain of loss, but to show her that the love between mother and daughter transcends even death. Miguel, although still struggling to fully comprehend what they were experiencing, had come to accept that there are aspects of life that defy conventional logic. What mattered most to him was that his family was united and that both Carmen and Isabella were happy. 2 years later, when Isabella turned 6, Carmen finally understood the extraordinary gift she had received. It was no longer about searching for scientific or rational explanations for the similarities between Isabella and Valentina. It was about accepting that love and the bond between mother and daughter had found a way to endure, offering healing where once there had only been pain. Isabella had started primary school and had adjusted beautifully. She was a bright, empathetic, and lively child. Her teachers described her as unusually mature for her age, with a wisdom that seemed to exceed her 6 years. Although she still displayed traits that reminded Carmen of Valentina, Isabella was clearly developing her own unique personality. Carmen had decided that she would tell Isabella the full story about Valentina when she turned 10. She wanted her daughter to understand why her mother sometimes became so emotional when she said certain phrases or made certain gestures. For now, Isabella simply knew she had an older sister who had passed away when she was very young, and that her mother had missed her deeply. Miguel had become the father Isabella needed, patient, loving, and completely devoted to her well-being. He had also developed a deep respect for Valentina's memory and understood that her spiritual presence in their lives did not threaten their current family. It enriched it. The relationship between Carmen and Miguel had grown stronger through this extraordinary experience. They had learned to communicate openly about difficult topics, to support each other in moments of confusion or doubt, and to build a home where both Valentina's memory and Isabella's life could coexist in harmony. Carmen had returned to teaching, this time working with children around Isabella's age. Her experience of loss and healing had made her an exceptionally empathetic and effective educator. Her colleagues noticed that she had a unique ability to connect with children going through tough times. For Isabella's 6th birthday, Carmen organized a small celebration that for the first time honored both Isabella and Valentina. There were 2 cakes, 1 chocolate for Isabella and a small vanilla cake, Valentina's favorite. Isabella blew out the candles on oath, making one wish for herself and another for her sister in heaven. That night, as Isabella slept holding Bunny close to her chest, Carmen reflected on the extraordinary journey she had lived over the past 18 years. She had lost a daughter in the most traumatic way imaginable. She had survived a devastating depression. She had rebuilt her life, step by step, and had found love again. But more than all of that, she had received a gift that defied all logic, the chance to be a mother once more to a little girl who carried echoes of the daughter she had lost. Carmen no longer asked herself whether Isabella was literally Valentina reincarnated or if she had simply formed an extraordinary spiritual connection with her late sister. What mattered was that Isabella had brought healing, love, and hope back into her life. Yet Carmen had learned that a mother's love is a force that transcends time, space, and even death. She had learned that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a new way to love and to live. Miguel and Isabella slept peacefully, and for the first time in 18 years, Carmen felt whole. She had found her way back to happiness, not by forgetting Valentina, but by honoring her memory through the unconditional love she now shared with Isabella. Her family was complete: Miguel, Isabella, the blessed memory of Valentina, and a future full of possibility. The tragedy of 2006 had finally found its resolution in the miracle of renewed love and a reformed family. Carmen had learned that some wounds never heal completely, but that the human heart has an infinite capacity to grow and to welcome new loves without diminishing those that came before. Isabella had not replaced Valentina. She had completed the love story that death had interrupted, but could never finish. The house was filled with peace as 3 hearts beat in harmony, united by a love that had proven stronger than tragedy, more persistent than pain, and more powerful than death itself.